Good morning to you all. Welcome to another edition of Weather Academy on this Friday. By the way, we do apologize. On Monday, we had some technical snafus that we really didn't talk about.
Wednesday.
Was it Wednesday?
Wednesday,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. 2 days ago, Wednesday. You're right. Okay, that's why he's here.
The day's all blended.
Yes, so we have it. So hopefully, well, if you can see us, that means it's working.
Yes.
Okay, but we apologize for the little fiasco on Friday.
And even if we can't, and even if you can't, we post them. So these live forever on the weather page, your .com. Right at the top of the page, you'll see weather, and there's going to be a little drop down in the choice for Weather Academy. So if you missed it, they are there. Give it about, by the end of the day, these will be posted,
Typically.
if not sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. But appreciate you coming here today. And, you know, we talked about thunderstorms the last time, so why don't we up it up a notch a little bit and tell you, you know, thunderstorm heavy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So we talked about clouds, thunderstorms, which is a cumulonimbus cloud, and a lot of times when we get thunderstorms, especially severe thunderstorms, the question on everybody's mind, and we get a lot,
Ton of them.
is there going to be a tornado? Now, here's the deal. There's a lot of things that you have to look for. It has to come together just right in the atmosphere to produce a tornado. But the bottom line is, anytime there's a severe thunderstorm, you can't completely rule it out. But there are certain things that really have to line up just right for a storm to produce a tornado.
Absolutely. And sometimes the ingredients are there. And, you know, you're making the cake. And, you know, I look at, you know, the ingredients for, I think of it as a cake. You know, if you, I mean, you could have the best flour, you can have the best sugar, and cook it just right, the right temperature. But if you don't mix it up,
Right.
you don't have a cake.
Yep.
You know? And that's kind of what happened. You know, that's what we do as meteorologists. You know, we look at the ingredients for a tornado, and if they're all there, and we have people who actually specially trained, called the Storm Prediction Center.
They are the pros.
Yep, in Norman, Oklahoma. That's near Oklahoma, close to Oklahoma City, and an appropriate place,
Right.
since it's in the middle of Tornado Alley, which we'll chat
Yep, we're
about
gonna chat
later
about
in the
that,
show.
yep.
But all of us, you know, even Craig and I and Tom Atkins locally, we look at the ingredients and make our best assessment. Will there be a tornado or not?
Yeah, so a couple of questions ago, we actually had someone ask about the Weather Service and where watches and warnings come from. So that's a government thing. We don't issue watches and warnings, but that information is passed on to us to pass on to you. And a big key of issuing a watch and warning comes from the National Severe Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma. Those guys are constantly looking for this sort of thing. They'll pick out a region on a particular day and say, that's the area we got to watch. And then there's a whole list of kind of like a checklist that they have to coordinate with the regional National Weather Service offices, which then communicate with us. So it's a whole kind of layered cake.
It is.
You know?
Absolutely. And, you know, they have different levels of, you know, as you might guess, sometimes it looks really good, okay, and they'll issue one of their highest risks for tornadoes. Other times they have what are called marginal risk, where, it's there, but, you know, we
Could
really,
be
yeah, could be better, or boy, things really would have to line up perfectly.
Yeah.
So that's how we know.
Yep.
That's how we
So there's like a little checklist that we look at, and we put a check mark next to each ingredient, if you will, to see if they are all coming together. So with that, let's talk about tornadoes. And they are known as nature's most violent storms because not in all cases, but in some cases, they can have winds up to 300 miles per hour, which has been documented. But here's the thing about tornadoes. They're very difficult to study because the only way you can really determine what's going on is if you're inside one. Well, we can't be inside one.
For the most part, yeah.
You know, so that's why we have storm chasers. Again, highly trained meteorologists that know what they're doing. And if I could just take a quick moment and talk about storm chasing, it's not something you should do as a leisurely thing. You should really have some sort of training behind you and know what you're doing before you put yourselves in that kind of line of fire. It's dangerous. And those people that you see on television, have some sort of background in meteorology and know what they're doing. So this is not something that you can do on a whim and go out and chase these things. It's not recommended unless
No,
you have some
absolutely, right.
training.
But at the same time, sometimes, we do get video of people who happen to, get the phone out and they say, "Hey, is this a tornado?" That kind of deal. One of the nice things that I've seen, just in my years here is, before the Weather Service and the private sector, the people were kind of separate entities. They didn't communicate. Now with technology, there's a lot of communication. The Weather Service, again, we don't recommend you going out and chasing tornadoes on a whim here, but the Weather Service, certainly does appreciate when the general public, phones take pictures
More
now.
eyeballs.
More eyeballs, because when it comes down to it, we can detect tornadoes in many ways. We got great technology and radar, but nothing beats a good set of eyes to where twisting is occurring.
Yeah, so these tornadoes are ranked on a scale known as the Enhanced Fujita scale. Professor of meteorology, I think, or physicist,
he was
doctor?
Actually a physicist. He was not a meteorologist.
Okay. Well,
he knew me. Physicist and meteorology. There's
it's close.
There's a lot of tie-in between the two. And Fujita was Japanese.
Yep, Dr. Ted Fujita.
Dr. Ted Fujita. Back in 1971. Okay. Because we were saying before, it's kind of hard to tell how strong a tornado is. He used physics to figure out how strong a tornado is by looking at the physics of damage and other parts of what tornadoes do after it goes through.
Yeah, so there was a time where it was just the Fujita scale. Back early 2000s, 1990s, when it was just F1, F2, F3. But then what happened is we kind of took another look at some things, and we came up with the Enhanced Fujita scale, which kind of reevaluates. There's not much of a change, but with the growth of technology, we've been able to kind of hone in on that damage scale a little bit better.
We learned a lot, in that 40-year span from when Dr. Fujita made the scale, and with more physics, and again, because we have more eyeballs and more studies, they enhanced it a little bit more, and it goes from EF0, which is the smallest and weakest of tornadoes, all the way to EF5. The old Fujita scale had a max wind speed of 300. The new ones, again, they scale back a bit on the winds, but it really doesn't change the way we warn you. It doesn't change the way you should, take cover and protect yourself from tornadoes.
And I will just make a quick side note on that. When we talk about an EF5 and maybe even EF4, the highest end of the scale on tornado, EF5 tornadoes are, believe it or not, incredibly rare.
Very.
But they do happen, and we've had several cases. Unfortunately, Joplin, Missouri comes to mind, where these EF5 called maxi tornadoes go through populated areas. But it's very rare that that happens, but it can. So with that, I have a question for you, Tom. Can tornadoes happen in northwest Pennsylvania?
Well, I believe the answer to that is an absolute yes.
Yes, they can.
They can, absolutely. They can occur. They've occurred in every state. Every state has had one. Yes, even Alaska. Hawaii has had them. Okay, Montana. Okay, Maine. In fact, you may be surprised to learn that Pennsylvania, when it comes to the amount of tornadoes in a given area, Pennsylvania actually ranks 20th. We are actually in the top half when it comes to tornado frequency. Now, most occur in the southeastern part of the state, but we do get some up here, as you well know.
Yeah, let's take a look. So we've answered, can tornadoes happen in northwest Pennsylvania? Yes, absolutely. They can happen anywhere. We've heard many times some myths about tornadoes, like, oh, if you live in a mountainous area, you're protected. That's not the case. These tornadoes, they don't care. They've been documented going up and down mountains like they're nothing, So just because you may live in an area with hills surrounding you doesn't mean anything. They can still happen. They can happen in cities. Last year, there was a tornado in New York City. You know, it was a very weak tornado, but EF0, EF1 for a city is a damaging tornado, you know.
And, you know, 1999, Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma
got
City,
hit,
yep.
you know, so yeah, you know, and cities, large cities can get hit.
They can also occur on the water. Now, when they are on the water, they take on the name of a water spout. However, when you have water spouts, they're typically weaker, but if they come on shore, well, then what happens? Well, then they become a tornado.
Sure, absolutely.
Check this picture out. This is
cool.
really cool stuff. This is a picture of twin water spouts on Lake Michigan. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, Lake Michigan, well, we live near Lake Erie. Can water spouts happen on Lake Erie? Absolutely, and they do quite frequently. But again, most of the time, water spouts are just a little bit weaker than actual land tornadoes.
They are, and the reason for that is I mean, there are two types of water spouts. One would be water spouts that come from severe storms in the summertime, where they happen to either form on water, go from land to water. Lack of a better term, a true water spout actually occurs normally in the late fall when the lakes are very warm and you get those cold air. You know, tornadoes form when you have very warm, moist air that rises. Well, when you have a warm lake, Lake Erie's, you know, in the fall it can be 50, 60 degrees, and if you get 30-degree water that goes over it, now the lake becomes the heat source. So water spouts form over the lake. When a true water spout comes on land, well, it loses its heat source, so it tends to dissipate quickly after going on land. But sometimes, as Craig mentioned, they can still be, you know, they can still cause some damage, especially if you live near the lake shore.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that if you're a mariner or, you know, any type of water activity, something you got to be on the lookout for, like we talked about on Wednesday. When you hear thunder, you go inside, especially if you're on the water, because you can get water spouts, and they can, even though they're most of the time weaker than actual tornadoes, but if they come on land, they can cause damage too. So it's something that you need to be mindful of as well. So kind of going back to Wednesday's lesson, remember, if you're on the water and there's thunder and lightning, you got to get off the water. Quickly, because not only do you have the lightning, which is a risk in and of itself, but you can get water spouts too. But a pretty neat shot right there, I'd say.
It really is.
All right, so where we asked if tornadoes could happen in northwest Pennsylvania, the answer, yes, they can happen anywhere, but there's this particular area in the United States that we really hone in on. And Tom, I'll let you take this one, Tornado Alley, because I know that you are actually doing some things with this for an upcoming another project we're working on here.
Working on a special that you're all familiar with, and we're hopeful to get that on soon.
Yep.
But yes, this is a Tornado Alley. It's a place there in red, as you can see. This is the place. This is a hot spot for tornadoes, not only in the United States but in the world. The United States is by far the tornado capital of the world. No other country even comes close to the United States, and no other part of the United States comes close to getting the most tornadoes. Right there in Tornado Alley. And you can see it goes roughly from Texas up through what we call the breadbasket of the United States, Oklahoma, all the way up into South Dakota. We probably have a secondary area.
We do.
In the deep,
yeah, I'll just say this is kind of drawn roughly. When we talk about the main Tornado Alley, that's the area that we look at. But there's the deep south, and even a little bit more east of that red area is susceptible to. Absolutely.
Typically, like about now, early spring into May. A lot of times you get the deep south, the Alabama, Mississippi area. If you want to pop it back up again there, Cindy.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of the mechanics that make this happen here.
Sure, absolutely. And as Craig has drawn on here, you have cold, dry air hitting warm, moist air. You may have learned, perhaps some of you kids may have learned that, in order for tornadoes to form, cold air has to meet warm air. And Yes, that's how it starts. You want particularly big differences. Cold air tends to be drier, and it tends to be more dense. It goes underneath. If you want to come back to us, Cindy, it goes underneath. Warm air goes on top. So you kind of get this action.
Yep.
And in the middle, you get
that horizontal roll.
right, the horizontal rotation. But tornadoes are vertical. So we need something else.
Yeah, we need, if you kind of remember what we talked about with thunderstorms and updrafts, that's what we need. So you get that horizontal roll going until it gets caught in an updraft, which takes that horizontal roll.
Right.
And
kind of sucks it up into the vertical.
tilts it into the vertical.
A lot of times that happens on the curve of a jet stream, as we call it. That's usually caused that, that good updraft. But again, that's the ingredient. Cold, dry air, warm, moist air, some kind of horizontal updraft. Now, you may notice, if we go back to the map again here, Craig also puts warm, dry flow.
I do, yes.
Now, it's interesting.
I did want to include that.
Yes, so thunderstorms require moisture. Why would you need a warm, dry flow into this storm? Well, moisture is the gasoline, and you need a lot of moisture. Water is energy, but you also need a trigger to get that energy to pop. Just like with a car, in order for a car to run, you have a spark plug. You can have all the great gas you want. Without a spark plug, the car doesn't go.
Got nothing. You ain't going anywhere.
The warm, what we call the warm, dry intrusion, what it does, because when you get drier, warmer air into it, warm air heats up very quickly.
Sure does.
That's the explosiveness that you want. Now, you don't have to have it, but if you do, that's when you can get those real high EF3, 4, and 5 tornadoes.
Yeah, so if you think about a parcel of air, and I'll just use my little clicker, and warm air rises, so this little parcel of air is going up, and then it hits a layer of dry air in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. So here's your little air parcel going up. What do you think is going to happen when it hits that layer of warm, dry air? Zing! Boom! It's going to take off. And that's that incredible lift that you need to get these nasty thunderstorms.
Exactly. If the whole column was moist, it would go up, but it wouldn't go up with the speed needed to really create tornadoes. Then we worry about flooding as opposed to tornadoes. So that little dry intrusion really does help.
So it's all about geography, and definitely the United States, as Tom mentioned, most susceptible in those areas because of the location of the Gulf of Mexico, the Rocky Mountains, the desert Southwest. All of those come together just to create that quote-unquote perfect storm, if you will, and that's why we see the most tornadoes in what we call Tornado Alley. All right, as we get down to quitting time, we want to ask again, what's inspiring you? Keep sending us your weather questions, and it can be anything in the world in terms of what inspires you. You want to find out as much as you can about it, and then maybe someday you'll get paid to do it.
Absolutely. And we also, what would you like us to talk about?
Sure.
Okay, so besides what inspires you, what do you want to talk about? In fact, this topic that we're talking about today came from someone, a child who wanted to know about tornadoes. And, it doesn't have to be the usual rain, snow. If there's some other kind of phenomena, we've
got some other things that we're going to talk about with you as well. But yeah, we want to make this as interactive as possible, and really hope that you guys are enjoying what we're doing and helping you out here, and kind of talking about the whys and the ways of weather.
Absolutely. And we would be remiss, just to let you know, you may say, well, when you have a tornado, well, what do we do to protect ourselves?
Good question.
That will be a subject for another day.
Yeah. Basically, we'll just let you know before we go, lowest level of your house. That's why we encourage you to go to a basement, but we will be talking about how to protect yourself from all kinds of weather coming up in the future. All right?
But until then, I want to thank you so much for joining us for Weather Academy. I appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something today. And again, email us your questions.
Yeah, we want to hear from you.
For Craig and myself, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again on Monday.
See ya.